My husband won't even let me touch him. After I cheated, a reflection on betrayal and consequences. Let me begin by being clear. If I were in your position, I wouldn't want to be touched either. My name is Amy, and I'm here to share my story. A story that serves as a warning about infidelity and the chaos it creates. I am not a victim in this situation. The real victims are my husband, my children, and even my parents, who have had to carry the weight of my choices. For that, I am deeply sorry. 19 months ago, I was caught in a betrayal that shattered my world and the lives of those I love. Before that, my life seemed perfect. I am a 32-year-old woman, married to my wonderful husband, Jim, who is 39. Together, we have two amazing boys, aged 9 and 11. From the outside, it seemed like we had everything we could ever want. But beneath the surface, I made a choice that would haunt me forever. To give you some context, my affair began over 2 years ago, but I was only caught 19 months ago. It lasted nearly 5 months, during which I was physically involved with another man, Steve, a married neighbor. While I want to be honest and upfront, I must tell you this. I was with Steve physically only 4 times. I know it sounds unbelievable, but that is the truth. You might wonder what led to this. Were there problems in my marriage? Did I not love Jim? The answer is a definite no to all of those questions. I was completely happy and fulfilled in my marriage. Jim was everything I ever dreamed of and more. I loved him and our boys more than anything in the world. The attraction to Steve stemmed from a deep, almost primal desire, one I thought I had buried. It was the allure of a first love. My story goes back to my past, which I will try to explain. In high school, I dated a few boys, but nothing serious came of those relationships. Then, when I was 18, I met Charles, a friend's cousin, at a barbecue. Charles was magnetic. The moment I saw him, I felt drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. We exchanged numbers, and our connection quickly grew. Our first kiss was magical, and it didn't take long before I lost my virginity to him. Despite the passion we shared, I soon realized that we had little in common, and we were incompatible. After 11 months, I broke it off with him. A year later, I met Jim. While there weren't sparks at first, over time, I developed a deep love for him, stronger than anything I had ever felt before. Jim was everything I had ever wanted, stable, kind, and dependable. I knew I wanted to marry him. We got married a year later, and for 13 joyful years, our marriage flourished until my infidelity destroyed it. The catalyst for my affair with Steve was his arrival in our neighborhood. Steve and his wife, Mara, were the youngest couple around, and their energy was contagious. Jim and I invited him to a neighborhood picnic where Steve and I first locked eyes. The chemistry was immediate, and I felt that familiar spark reignite within me. A week later, Jim and I visited Steve at the car dealership where he worked. While my husband talked to him about an SUV, Steve and I exchanged quick glances, each one silently acknowledging our attraction. Then came the moment that changed everything. I returned to the dealership a few days later to have mud flaps installed, and that's when Steve asked me into his office for a private conversation. As we sat down, the tension was palpable. It didn't take long for Steve to confess that he felt a connection with me and wanted to explore it further. Despite my better judgment telling me this was wrong, I found myself swept away by the excitement. The next morning, I found myself in his arms for the first time. The danger of the situation only made it more thrilling. I convinced myself that I could handle both my affair and my marriage. I thought I could have it all, enjoying the secret relationship while keeping my family life intact. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before my actions caught up with me. The physical relationship lasted a total of 4 encounters over those 5 months, but there was no emotional connection. I loved Jim and had never loved Steve. However, the allure of the forbidden was intoxicating. I was a stay-at-home mom. Perhaps I craved the attention and validation I was receiving from this younger man. I believed I could compartmentalize my life, keeping my family safe while indulging in a secret adventure. I wish I could say I was wise enough to end things before they escalated, but fate had other plans. It was a Thursday morning when everything fell apart. Steve and I were in his bed when Marcia's mother unexpectedly walked in on us. What followed was chaotic and traumatic. She went into a frenzy, yelling obscenities, slapping and scratching Steve, and hitting me square on the jaw before I could gather my clothes and escape. When I got back home, I was a wreck. The reality of what I had done washed over me like a wave of guilt and despair. I knew my seemingly perfect marriage to Jim was forever altered. After a couple of hours of silent contemplation, I called Jim and left an urgent message saying I needed to speak with him, but he didn't respond. Panic set in when I heard knocking on the door and screams from Marcia and her mother, demanding to know if I was home. I was terrified and overwhelmed with embarrassment. Thankfully, my boys were at school, but I was utterly lost in my guilt and shame. When the chaos finally subsided, I lay on the couch in tears, unsure of what the future held for me. Fast forward to today, and I am still struggling to reconcile the damage I've caused. My husband won't even let me touch him anymore, and I don't blame him. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. I live each day carrying the weight of my actions, trying to figure out how to move forward. I've started therapy to help me understand why I made such terrible choices and to work on my issues, hoping one day to regain my husband's trust. By sharing my story, I hope to shed light on the devastating effects of infidelity, not just on the betrayed partner, but also on the betrayer and the innocent children caught in the crossfire. If you find yourself in a similar situation, I urge you to reflect deeply before making choices that could ruin your life and the lives of those you love. Infidelity is not just a mistake. It's a fracture in the foundation of trust that can take years, if not a lifetime, to mend. My hope is that by sharing my experience, I can help others think twice before walking down that perilous path. I looked outside and saw my husband, so I hurried to the bathroom to splash water on my face and check my appearance before going to greet him. But when he opened the door, he didn't come in. Instead, I noticed him walking down the street toward Steve and Marcia's house. He stayed there for almost 3 hours before returning home. I wondered what he was doing with Marcia. When he finally got home, I went to hug him, but he pushed me away. I started apologizing, but he told me he didn't accept my apology and wanted me to leave. I fell to the floor, crying, begging him not to go, but he insisted. You notice how in these kinds of stories, the women often go down on their knees and start begging. It seems like a common reaction. He then called my mom, told her what had happened, and asked her to come pick me up. When she arrived, she apologized to Steve and made me go back to her house for the night. I was crying and asked Jim what he would tell the kids. He said he would handle it. I left feeling brokenhearted and ashamed. I admire Jim for saying he would talk to the kids because they deserve to know the truth, even though they are young. He needs to explain things in a way they can understand. I called Jim later and was surprised when he answered. He just said hello and stayed quiet. I told him it was me, that I was really sorry and would never do it again. I promised to spend my life making it up to him. Jim didn't say much and asked if I had anything else to say. I said no and asked how he felt. He replied, "You know what I'm feeling," which made me cry. Then he said he wanted me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before coming home. I reluctantly agreed but asked when I could see him and the boys again. He said he didn't want to see me now, but would call me every evening at 9 o'clock. Our next call went the same way, with me apologizing and him staying silent until I stopped talking. Then he told me he wanted a divorce. Hearing that made me cry, and I begged him for another chance, but he refused. He knew he'd lose half his assets, but then he said he would give me everything he owned if I would just leave him and the boys alone. At that moment, he just wanted me out of his life. I broke down, telling him he didn't mean that, but he insisted he did. After that call, I cried all night. I started thinking of ways to make him stay and came up with a plan to offer him a post-nuptial agreement that would be so good for him that he couldn't refuse. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love, no matter the cost. The next week, while Jim was meeting with his divorce lawyer, I was also meeting with one, not to prepare for a divorce, but to create a post-nuptial agreement to show Jim before he got the divorce papers. I visited 4 different lawyers until I found one who specialized in post-nuptial agreements and was willing to create one that heavily favored Jim. This agreement would allow Jim to keep almost all of our marital assets if we stayed married and living together for at least 30 months. If I were unfaithful again and we divorced, I would lose everything and receive no alimony or child support. It also required me to get a full-time job within 6 months and contribute to our household expenses. Additionally, the agreement allowed Jim to date other women during our marriage. I knew Jim would never cheat, but I wanted him to know that I loved him enough to give him this option. Surprisingly, Jim accepted my offer, but he added one more condition. There would be no requirement for us to sleep together or have any intimacy for the rest of our marriage. I felt sad but agreed, hoping that over time, I could win back his love and respect. Now, 17 months into what I call our second marriage, our relationship feels more like 2 roommates raising our boys. While I'm grateful for the second chance, it doesn't feel like a real marriage. Jim hasn't shown me any affection at all, not even a kiss or a hug. He won't let me near him to express any affection, although I sometimes sneak in a hug and a kiss before he can stop me. He also requires me to get monthly STD tests, which makes it clear that he doesn't trust me. Since the affair, Jim won't go out with me, even to family events. He feels embarrassed by me. At our boys' games, we alternate who takes them. When it's my turn, Jim shows up but doesn't say, "Sit with me." Instead, he stands with other dads and ignores me. The only times we go out together are for trips or vacations, where we book separate rooms with 2 queen beds, one for the boys and one for us. I look forward to these trips because they bring us closer, and I hope to break through to him. I suggested we move to start fresh, but Jim refuses, saying he will only move if he gets a job promotion. He plans to stay in our current home until the boys finish high school. They don't want to move either, since all their friends live nearby. Since the affair, I've lost all my friends in the neighborhood. Steve and Mara divorced 8 months after D-Day, but Mara and her kids still live down the street. The other neighborhood women I used to be close to have cut me off and blame me for breaking up families. They want to keep me away from their husbands. My home feels like a prison. I rarely go outside and stay in the backyard, tending to my garden while my boys play with their friends, including Marcia and Steve's kids. Thankfully, their lives have mostly stayed the same. Jim spends time with his friends in the neighborhood. They come over to hang out on our back porch, smoking cigars and sipping bourbon. He goes to work, to the gym, and then comes home to cook for himself. He won't eat anything I make anymore, although he did sneak some cookies I baked the other day. On weekends, he only eats what he cooks on the grill. None of my dishes during the weeks I have dinner with the boys, and it has been a wonderful bonding experience. We usually eat around 4 o'clock after they get home from school. They help set the table and clean up afterward, which I cherish because it brings us closer together and teaches them valuable skills. While some things in my life are great, many aspects are just awful. It sounds like you're trying to decide whether your marriage with Jim is worth saving, or if you should let him go and give him the financial support he would have received if he stayed. Deep down, you know he's not happy, and it's clear he no longer sees you as his partner, only as a co-parent. You love Jim deeply, regret what you've done to him, and want to return to the loving relationship you once had, but you feel like he won't allow that to happen. You're seeking advice on how to regain his love and trust after your betrayal. Amy, the truth is, it's nearly impossible to win back his trust completely. No matter what you do, the trust is gone, and the love he has for you is different now. It's not the same as it used to be. So, my advice to you and Jim is to divorce, go your separate ways, and start fresh. It's probably the best for you, Jim, and your kids. First response from a woman, she suggests staying married but living separately for a while. She believes that time apart might help rekindle their feelings, as distance can make someone appreciate what they had. She hopes they can work things out because she believes they are well matched. Personally, I don't think they are as compatible as she suggests. They seem very different. Second response from a man, he believes that if Amy truly loves Jim, she should let him go and allow him to keep most of what he's earned. He feels she's already hurt him enough, and Jim will never trust her again. He suggests that Amy might repeat her mistakes if she encounters the same kind of temptation in the future. I agree with him. Amy seems to be drawn to a certain type of person. Third response from another woman, she thinks Amy is attracted to one type of man physically, like Charles or Steve, and to another type mentally, like Jim. She advises Amy to hold on to Jim, saying that as time passes, the qualities of a good man like Jim will matter more than physical attraction. Fourth response from another man, he says that Amy's behavior is why he's hesitant to get married. He can't understand how someone can be loyal for years and then quickly betray their partner. He mentions that despite encountering attractive women, he remains committed to his girlfriend. First update. A few weeks later, Amy shares that she took some advice and moved out to give the marriage some space. She rented an apartment nearby to stay in contact with her kids, though she misses being in the same house. She notes that leaving their old neighborhood was a relief, as it held too many painful memories. Jim seemed surprised and a bit sad when she told him about her decision, which made her believe he still loves her. She continues to spend time with her kids and stays in touch with Jim, often calling just to talk. These conversations make her think that he still has feelings for her. It's clear Jim is starting to soften towards Amy again, but she is struggling with the distance. Amy seems hopeful that there's still a chance to rebuild their connection. Final update. 5 months later, Amy shares that Jim ultimately decided they should divorce. Even though he still has feelings for her, he mentioned that while he's open to the possibility of rekindling their romance someday, he couldn't do it while they're still married. It's something psychological for him. He said that while they're still married, he feels disrespected and betrayed. But once they get divorced, Jim's perspective on divorce. Jim thinks that if we divorce, he'll be able to move past the feelings of disrespect, embarrassment, and being undervalued. Being tied to me through marriage makes him feel these things, and he wants to regain control and strength. He believes that once we divorce, he will feel empowered again. Jim mentioned that after the divorce, he would consider dating me again, perhaps casually or as friends with benefits, which would allow him to control the terms of our relationship. He even promised that we would celebrate the finalization of the divorce together, maybe even spending the night. To me, it seems like he wants a divorce in a way that doesn't make him feel guilty, but I'm willing to agree to it if it means keeping him in my life. I still see him as a partner, a lover, and a friend, and if this arrangement is what he needs, I'm ready to try. Jim has made it clear that even if we get back together, he has no intention of remarrying. He believes that if there is genuine love between us, we don't need a legal contract to prove it. While I understand his point, I still wish there was a way for him to stay with me without going through a divorce. Regarding the divorce settlement, I've decided to voluntarily let Jim keep a third of our marital assets, even though he didn't follow through with the post-nuptial agreement. I also choose not to pursue alimony or child support from him. Some people might think I'm being too generous, but I believe he earned the money, and I trust that he would have shared everything with me if I had been faithful. I'm at peace with this decision. Even with a reduced settlement, I'll be able to live comfortably for the next 8 years or more without needing to work. And now that I do have a job, my financial situation is even stronger. It's clear Jim had built up a solid savings for our family's future. Looking back, it seems foolish that I risked everything by having an affair with someone who worked at a car dealership. It's not about his job, but more about the fact that I jeopardized a stable marriage to a successful man just for the excitement of it all. I often regret that choice even now. In closing, I want to thank those who offered me support and advice during this difficult time. Your words have really helped me. For those facing similar temptations, my advice is to resist. The short thrill is never worth the long-term loss of love, respect, and trust. If you feel like you can't control yourself, seek help before making a mistake. Best wishes to all of you. That's her story, and I found it insightful. Jim was clearly unhappy in their marriage. He wouldn't eat her cooking, wouldn't be seen with her, and distanced himself in many ways. It was a strange situation, likely made worse by financial concerns. He might have stayed for financial reasons, as the settlement terms allowed him to keep more of his fortune if he stayed married for a certain period. But in the end, no amount of money can truly buy happiness. Here's what I took away from this story. When a woman truly desires a man, she'll do whatever it takes to be with him, making his efforts almost unnecessary. If you had to work very hard to win her over, you might not have been her first choice. When she makes you wait for affection, it's a sign that you weren't her priority. If you're not her first choice, the likelihood of her being unfaithful is higher. It's often better to separate and provide children with two happy homes than to stay together in an unhappy one. Staying in a miserable marriage can negatively affect how kids view relationships.